Hey, what's going on, everyone? My name is Trey, and welcome to Let's Talk Finances. And today we are going to be discussing what is the best way to invest in my 401k or retirement plan. There is nothing more central to your retirement than your 401k plan. It represents nearly 85% of all retirement nest eggs. But finding the money to invest in your 401k is just one piece of that puzzle. The biggest piece of that puzzle is finding the right investments to fund your 401k or retirement plan. Now, when we speak of retirement plans, we could be talking about a 401k, a 403b, a 457b, or even a TSP, Thrifty Savings Plan, which is what I personally invest in, being that I am an active duty soldier. Now, according to a 2021 Fidelity Done survey, more than half of the 401k plan participants wish that it was a lot easier to choose the right funds for your 401k plan. Well, that's exactly what I'm here to do today, to help you make that decision in investing in your 401k or retirement plan and to make it simple. So by the time you finish this video, you'll have clear, concise guidance as to how to start investing, how to invest in the proper funds, and how to maintain that for a long period of time. Because remember, investing in a retirement plan is not a get-rich-quick scheme, all right? It's a long-term investment. I want to propose this question, right? So those of you who are currently invested in your retirement plan, be it a 401k or what have you actually logged into your account to see what funds you're exactly invested in? Many people have not done so. See, many people think that just because you've signed up for that 401k or retirement plan, that your employer is going to do everything for you. When in fact, what's probably happened is that they probably have you invested in a target dated fund. For those of you who don't know what a target dated fund is, I went over it in this video, so be sure to check that one out after this. I would highly encourage you, after watching this video, of course, to log into your retirement plan and see what you're invested in. And I'm willing to bet you a Krispy Kreme donut that you are currently invested in a target dated fund, more than likely through Vanguard. So put down in the descriptions below, once you check, are you currently invested in a target dated fund for your retirement plan? So I'm going to be giving you 4 things that you need to be considering in order to get the ball rolling on your retirement plan investment journey. So number 1, you need to understand your risk. So many of investors get into investing and don't think about the risk because all you're thinking about is making as much money as possible. Although that's what all of us should be thinking of, but there are a lot more things that go into that decision than just making money, because there can be things that happen along the way that are not effective or conducive in your ability to make long-term gains. And one of those main things are risk. Before you make any decision in your investment journey, you need to understand risk. You see, some people think that investing is actually too risky, when the reality is the most riskiest factor comes when you're holding onto cash. That's right. You'll lose money if you're not investing in a retirement plan. So let's say hypothetically you have $10,000 uninvested. Well, technically it'll be worth half of that, actually less than half of that, in 30 years due to inflation. Now, if you invest those same funds in your 401k or retirement plan while bringing in a very modest 7% returns, you'll have over $75,000 in that 30-year period. Now, mind you, that is without any more contribution. So a $10,000 investment for 30 years reaping 7% returns will bring you over $75,000. Now, the trick to this, obviously, is if you continue to invest, auto-invest into those funds, let's say another modest $400 per month, you'll see that figure jump from $75,000 well up into the hundreds of thousands, and that is due to compound interest. So the next question will probably be, well, how? How do I choose those funds? How do I invest in a 401k? Well, What you need to determine after understanding the risk is deciding what your asset allocation is going to be. And essentially that means deciding where or what your money will be invested into. So let's talk a little bit more about that here in the next category. Number two, the second thing that we're going to be needing to look into, decide how much risk you're willing to assume. By deciding how much risk that you're willing to assume will actually help you in identifying what your asset allocation should be. But one thing to remember when you're investing, as stated earlier in this video, retirement planning is a long-term window. So generally, we're talking 30, 40, or 50 years to be able to invest. Because of this, you can afford to be more aggressive. You see, with my investment strategy, I understand that the longer the window, the more aggressively I can be investing. And you should follow that same model. But for the sake of simplicity, the common rule of thumb is the longer time you have to invest, the more aggressively you should be investing. But the shorter your window, the more conservatively you should be investing. So to understand what your asset allocation should be, the simple thing to do is take 110 and subtract your age from that number. The number that is left over will be the percentage of equities or stocks that you should be invested in. Whatever is left over after that is the percentage of bonds that you should be invested in. But I'll also be getting into bonds here shortly. Let's say you're 30 years old, right? So if you subtract 30 from 110, so your asset allocation would be 80% stock, 20% bonds, so on and so forth. When determining what amount of risk you're willing to accept, I always propose this question because I'll ask a lot of the individuals that I consult, I'll say, hey, what's your risk tolerance? And most people will say, hey, my risk tolerance is through the roof. I can take the risk. Well, then I ask, let's say you had $1 million and you invested that into the market. The next day, the market crashed by 50%, which leaves you with 500,000. What's your next move? Do you stay in the market and continue investing or not even putting more money in? Or will you consider pulling the 500,000 out because your risk tolerance is low? See, if you're actually considering taking your funds out, then your risk tolerance is not as high as you think that it is. So this is something very crucial that you need to identify before you go into choosing those funds. So decide what your asset allocation is going to be by first deciding what your risk tolerance is. Third step that you need to be taking, and that is going to be weigh your investment options. Now, a 401k plan has small investment selections, which almost always has mutual funds. Now, ideally, that would include exchange traded funds or ETFs as well as index funds. So let's say most of the time, you're not going to be choosing individual stocks. Whew, thank God. There's a higher percentage of either ETFs or index funds that's going to be included as choices in your retirement plan. And what you'll also tend to see is it's going to be spread out into categories. And those categories include a small cap index fund, an international index fund, a bond index fund, as well as an S&P 500 index fund. Now that you understand what risk is, you also understand what your risk tolerance is, and also what your asset allocation is going to be. Now you're ready to actually choose your investment. There are some people that choose to invest in bonds, and the reason for it is a security blanket. So if you're invested in equities, your risk factor is a bit higher, but you would also invest in some bonds to smooth out that ride and cushion the blow. If in fact something happens to the market, you can rely on those bonds to reinvest or what have you. I personally do not invest in bonds in my retirement plan, and here is why. Investing in a retirement plan is a long-term window. So I know that I'm going to be invested somewhere between 20 to 40 years, if not 50 years. The longer amount of time you have to invest, the more risk you can assume. So for me, I invest as aggressively as possible in my retirement plan because I know I have a large amount of time to rebound if need be. So for that reason, my wife and I do not invest in any bonds in our retirement plan. So that leaves us three other options. It leaves us with small cap index fund, S&P 500 index fund, as well as international index funds. These three funds allows for you to make your portfolio as complicated or as simple as possible. Now, I live by the motto, and if any of you have been actually watching the videos on my channel, then you understand that my investment motto is keeping your investment strategy as simple as possible. The more complicated you get with your investments, the more difficult you make it on yourself. So make your investments as simple as possible. My favorite fund is a total stock market index fund. It's my absolute favorite. But being that my wife and I both currently invest in a total stock market index fund in our IRAs as well as brokerage account, there really isn't that much of a need for us to try and replicate a total stock market index fund through these funds that are offered in a retirement plan. And what I mean by replicating is that if you take the S&P 500 index fund and then you also mix that with a small cap index fund, for the most part, you can replicate a total stock market index fund, with the exception of there may be some mid-cap index funds that are missing from that. But I don't really feel as though it's a necessity to do so. By investing in simply the S&P 500 index fund, as the great Warren Buffett has stated, I think that you'll have a great opportunity in reaping those benefits over the long-term horizon. Well, what about international funds? Should I be invested internationally as well? Well, a lot of people will say, hey, if you're not invested internationally, you're not truly diversified. Some people will say, hey, you don't really need to invest internationally because there's international exposure through the S&P 500. In both cases have some validity to it. But what it's going to come down to is your personal investment strategy. Just because I tell you, hey, you shouldn't be invested in international funds at all, doesn't make that, like the end all to be all right? So it's going to come down to your personal investment strategy. For me, I do not invest in any international index funds through my retirement plan, and neither does my wife, all right? So we're 100% all in the S&P 500 index fund through our retirement plan. The fourth thing, and probably one of the most important things, is going to be to minimize your expenses. Index funds generally have a market average of 0.08% and an expense ratio, to whereas mutual funds are going to have a market average of about 0.80%, which is a large difference, all right? Now, the reason that you're paying more for a mutual fund or an actively managed account is because you're paying someone to manage the account for you. And in this event, I would say there is no need for you to be invested in an actively managed account through your retirement plan. You don't need anyone else to manage that for you. You can simply invest in a low-cost, passively managed index fund and save thousands of dollars in your long-term horizon, all right? And remember that those expense ratios are disclosed for each fund on the website for your 401k. Please don't forget to subscribe. And lastly, please don't forget to hit the like button, as it definitely helps this channel to grow. Lastly, I want to thank the men and women who have served and continue to serve this great country of ours. I really appreciate you all. So until the next time, guys, let's talk finances then.